Welcome to the latest episode of the Heart and Science podcast. I'm your host, Aarti Shah, and I'm here with my co-host, Bill Coletti.
Hey, Aarti, how are you?
Oh, I'm good. Still adjusting to this time change.
It's terrible. It's the worst week of my life. I lose this amazing hour, so I can't stand it.
I know, but it's also light. I mean, I will say it's really wonderful for it to be 6 o'clock and to be able to walk the dog leisurely. Yep. All right, Bill, anything else going on exciting in your world down in Austin, Texas?
Well, it's South by Southwest week, preceded by the education. We had Harry and Megan here in town. So they spoke and I was not there. We typically use South by as an opportunity to get out of town. Unless I've got a client in town. We had one here for the education thing, but we didn't get over there to that. But yeah, so it's exciting. South by is always sort of cutting edge and new people talking about exciting things. AI, from what I understand, was the topic of conversation, other than Harry and Meghan.
So, I mean, not to sound like an old person here, but I remember when South by was this little festival and you could just wander in and see Jason Schwartzman, Richard Linklater, Ethan Hawke. And it was so cool. And it was so unassuming. And it's become such a spectacle, right? To the point where I've seen people on LinkedIn complain about, they have their platinum badges and they can't even get into some of the top sessions, that they're having to watch them on a screen in another room. And it makes me wonder if there's an opportunity for a, up and coming kind of side festival. And I'm sure it's probably happening. Someone's going to send me a text and they're going to say, we're already doing this side festival. Because there's something really special about the early days of something. But Bill, can I ask you as a crisis expert, you mentioned Harry and Meghan, and my gosh, how can we not talk about the royal family in this moment? What is happening there? And I don't know if this is something you want to talk about. Yeah. But talk about crisis.
Photoshop is not your friend. And whacking off your own daughter's arm is rarely a good Photoshop tactic. Yeah, let's give him credit. With now King Charles, he has been more transparent about his prostate cancer than any other royal that we've ever seen. So let's give him, they're screwing up a good bit, but I give him props for talking about that. It's a big issue for a lot of men. And so he's been pretty forthright about it. I don't think she was quite as forthright about whatever stomach or abdomen thing that was going on. And obviously the photoshopping was a kind of a silly foot fault for them, but they have not found their footing like the Queen had. And so I think they're all sort of trying to figure it out because everybody moved up a rung and the rules they brought from job one doesn't transfer necessarily to job two.
Yes. Some lessons for us all in that. Just because I know we'll get comments, while he had an enlarged prostate, I believe they have not disclosed what kind of cancer he has. And they have said it's not prostate cancer. But I do think you're right. He brought a lot of attention to, men.
It's good to talk about.
Yes. Regardless. Awareness, right? I mean, that's something that's a really positive thing that anyone in the public eye can do around any health issue. I just saw Olivia Munn today just announced that she had a double mastectomy, breast cancer, relatively young woman, hopefully, motivates other young women to kind of go in and make sure that they're on top of all of that. So lots happening in the world at the moment, right?
Absolutely. It's a busy time. The spring is always sort of this busy time of rebirth where all sort of, everybody sort of says, oh, wow, the year's going. So let's figure out what we're going to do in March and April. So yeah, it's a certainly exciting time. We've launched a number of exciting things on the coaching side of the business. So yeah, busy season for us.
Yes. And we are in the thick of award season in our business as well. In parallel to the Oscars wrapping up this past Sunday, things are ramping up on the awards front for the marketing industry. I think PR Week is doing their awards. We have Cannes Lion deadlines are coming up. Sabre Awards are in about a month. So yeah, lots. It is. I love that. It's a time of rebirth. We all feel it. There's a spring in our step, literally, figuratively.
Hey, are all of those deadlines generally the same? I mean, is this like a 60-day crunch time right now?
We're in the ceremony season at the moment.
Okay.
So this is, but that's a great question, Bill. many of these deadlines actually happen in 2023 or in the preceding year, Q4, Q3-ish, but more Q4. And then some of them spill over into Q1. Cannes is the exception to that. Their deadline is April. And then of course, festival happens in June. But it's really, so really the way that we think about it, it's a 24/7 award season these days. But there are these inflection points, which are, PR Week, Sabre, Cannes, everything sort of builds towards those three.
So if an owner that had not been in the awards business or seeking them, when's the time they should be thinking about that and getting ready to be able to hit the ground running for the season? When should they be thinking about it?
We many of the agencies that I know really think about awards as an always on.
Okay.
Now, but if I had to put a timeline on it, I would absolutely say summer. By summer, you should know what your best campaigns are. You should have at least started maybe prototyping some of those best campaigns so that you have enough time for the feedback cycles that you're going to need. And never underestimate how many of those you'll need. And these days, things like video and other visuals are expected. So again, you want to make sure that you leave enough runway to be able to add those assets as well.
Sure. And there's some production value and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So who do we have today on our podcast? Today we have a dear friend of both of Bill and I's, Bob Finlayson. And if you recognize that name, it's because he has been around for a while. His experience spans everything from launching Xbox for Edelman, tells you a little bit about how long he's been in our business, to working at Highwire, which is a relatively new agency to the landscape. And he's just collected a really diverse range of experiences along the way, working with relatively small shops, working with financial comms to like behemoths like Salesforce. And what I am most interested in about, and Bill, I'd love to hear from you next, is that he's relatively late to starting his own agency. He's a co-founder for Bold Marketing, and he started it just within the last 5 years.
Yeah. Yeah. So two things. I think that after a big agency, numerous big agency experiences and some big corporate experiences, that transition to entrepreneurship is one that it's interesting to learn more about. And I also about picking the right partner, finding the right partner. And I think those things kind of go hand in hand. Is the delay. I think you mentioned that he had the bug for a while, but he didn't find the right fit, didn't find the right partner. And so I think that sort of attributed to it. But that's a hard transition when you get bigger responsibility, bigger salaries, bigger benefits package. And to say you're going to go on your own is a challenge. A lot of people kind of that it's not quite classic golden handcuffs, but kind of silver handcuffs for people to make that move.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I talk to agency leaders frequently who, I'll ask them, I'll say, so when are you going to hang up your shingle? And they really have it too good where they're at to even explore that.
But miserable at the same time. At the same time.
And some of them, some of them out of necessity. I think Axios did a great piece on this recently, right? About some of them out of necessity as agencies are kind of clearing out a lot of their veterans. Many of them are starting their own shops now. The other thing I want to encourage our listeners to think about as they listen to Bob is he's truly a futurist. Like he predicted a world where sort of AI would be a dominant force over a decade ago. And what I find interesting about Bob is he's always asked me this question about, how much would humanity change if we were able to achieve immortality at some point? And Bob is such a futurist that he believes that it may happen sooner rather than later. So it may seem like a tangent to talking about ownership, but it's a healthy philosophical lens.
It's what he's known for. It's what he's known for. And I'm sure it's very tractional to clients, the big thinking that he does. I'm sure it's attractional. I think he's certainly an interesting fella who has big agency, entrepreneurism, and future thinking kind of in his background, which makes him very valuable for people to learn from.
All right. Well, let's not keep everybody waiting. Let's bring out Bob Finlayson.
It is our honor to introduce Bob Finlayson, who is the co-founder of Bold Marketing. And he is a mutual friend of both Aarti and I. And I will, Bob, ask you to do a quick introduction of yourself here in a moment. But the thing that I think we like most about you, among the many, many things that we like about you, is that you actually introduced the two of us and connected us in the context of you guys should know each other and try to do something together. And lo and behold, 5-6 months later, it's now a podcast. So on the behalf of my amazing co-host, thank you very much for the introduction. And we'd just love to hear a little bit of bio and background of yourself.
Absolutely. Well, one of the, as you become more experienced in any field, right, you know a lot more people. And so one of the pleasures is to be able to connect great folks and have them turn out wonderful things like what you guys are doing. So it's my privilege to be able to have done that. So yes, Bob Finlayson, Bold Marketing and Communications. We founded the firm about 2.5 years ago, so we're pretty young. Before that, I spent a long time on the agency side of the world, working at firms like Edelman, Burson Marsteller, and Blanca-Notis. So spent a lot of time in the Bay Area and also in Seattle, working mostly with tech companies, and really had the privilege to work with some great names in the business over that time, and some great brands, Microsoft and HP and SAP and Oracle. So it's been a really exciting career, and started my own firm a couple of years ago when I found the ideal partner in a guy named Paul Bernardo. So that's how it came to be.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So right off the top, as best as you can, compare and contrast your big agency, because you've worked with you've had leadership positions with some of the world's largest firms. And right at the outset, compare and contrast that experience from client service, the way you lead, the way you manage, the way you sort of bring creativity. Compare and contrast that with now doing it with Paul and doing it on your own. Just level set for everybody, the big global for where you are now.
Yeah, I mean, the big global agencies serve a really important part in the market, right? They tend to work with mostly large companies that need broad services, and that might include great geographic reach, offices in many different regions and many different countries, and so that's the market that they serve best. Whereas Bold is a boutique firm, we're very selective about our clients. We do work mostly with enterprises, fairly large companies, although also, well-funded startups, I guess, would be the other group. And we're very focused on providing marketing support. That includes everything from content creation, helping them understand their audiences through customer personas, helping build out customer journeys, and that kind of work. So we're very focused, whereas the big agencies tend to be very broad. They have very large teams. So I think that's, kind of a top line differentiator.
Do you identify as a challenger firm?
Well, yes, I think everybody wants to do that, don't they? I mean, I think we look at ourselves as being working with the latest technology, working with the latest practices. My partner likes to say, if it's a best practice, we don't do it because it's already passé. And so, we're a challenger brand, certainly in the way we think of ourselves, and the kind of clients that we like to work with and help them do new and interesting things.
You mentioned your business partner, Paul, several times, and I'm just curious, can you tell us a little bit about how you all met and how you knew that he was the ideal partner for you to launch this venture?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question, because I think one of the things that anybody who's started an agency knows that, there are several options, right? One is that you start it on your own, you build it from there, you bring on a team, but you're the principal, the only principal. Another is to look for a partner or multiple partners. In looking at other agencies over the years, it was my view that the most successful are the ones that have multiple partners, because no one person can do everything. You can't be everything, and you can't be everywhere, and you can't be the right person for every client. So when you have a partner, that gives you a lot more depth, in my view. So Paul and his career is the mirror image of mine. He's been on the client side his whole career, right? So I've been mostly on the agency side, and he's been mostly on the client side. And so I pitched him, in fact, at least once, for his business when I was on the agency, in the agency world, working with, looking at his type of clients. And so we met and knew each other and really liked each other. And then a couple of years ago, when Paul was getting ready to leave where he was, he came to me and he asked me about starting an agency. And we got to talking, and we found that we were very aligned in our thinking about what needs to happen, what needs to change, what really is, how new technologies and new strategies of approaching the marketplace can be enable us to do something different. And we just were like, we should do this together. So it was kind of a magical moment, if you will.
If you went back to that first meeting when I think you said he called you, and if there was the sort of, everybody talks about the cocktail napkin where they sketch out business plans. It's whether you have a cocktail napkin or not is beside the point. But if you went back to that first conversation and re-looked at the vision you guys cast for the firm, and then look at where you are today, what's the similarities? What are the differences? Talk a little bit about from day one cocktail napkin to 2.5 years and a number of clients into it.
Yeah, that's a good question, Bill. I think, like every firm has to evolve, right? As you go along, you have one idea at the beginning, and then as you work with clients, you see, okay, we need to modify our offering. We need to expand our offering, provide the services that the client needs, not necessarily what we originally thought. So we have definitely done that, but the core of what we started with still remains, which is that the key factor is to understand your audience. When you're an enterprise and you're trying to influence people to buy your products and services, the key thing you need to do is not just understand your products and services, but understand what your audience, what their concerns are, what their pain points are, how they think, and how they're approaching the problems that they have that your product or service might solve. So, our goal was to do that with data. How do we understand using data, not just a gut instinct, but really diving into the data of online conversations, which serve as almost like focus groups, as well as building out customer personas. What do these people care about? How do they approach things? And then also looking at what we call the architecture of purchase, which is how these enterprises put together a buying committee, who's on it, who do you need to influence, and how do you need to influence those people? So that was the thing that we started with, which was, we saw a lot of companies sort of touting their products and services without really understanding the audience that they were trying to reach and what their needs were.
So who's your client? Like, who are you sort of selling your services to? Is it marketing? Is it comms?
It's mostly marketing. We do also do some comms work. Mostly that's around thought leadership campaigns where those two tie together. But our primary client is a VP of marketing, a CMO, a VP of demand generation. But sometimes it could be a chief communications officer who's looking at building out a content program that's really going to move the company forward, drive demand. So it could be, any one of those people.
Let's go back for a second, and I want to ask you another question about having a business partner, because I think that is really important. And from my lens, I have talked to agency founders who will sing the praises of both ends of that spectrum, right? There's agency owners who famously will say, I will pay people the highest salaries that they can imagine, but I will not give equity. Like they will, and there's a right, and on the other end of that, there are like yourself, Bob, folks who said, I would not have done this without a partner. I could not do this on my own. Having been in this now for 2.5 years, do you see more of the upsides of both of those? And would you still sort of advise entrepreneurs today to try to find a partner? And in what circumstances would you recommend somebody going at it by themselves? And a second part to this question would just be, and how do you resolve conflicts and challenges as they come up?
Well, let me take the last part of that question first, because I think that's really key. When you have a partner, one of the advantages is that you don't see everything alike, right? Paul and I challenge each other all the time. And we get into these conversations where, like, basically looking at something from very different perspectives. And then at the end of the day, we come away with something better. Sometimes I convince him and he's like, okay, I think you're right about this. But whatever the end result is, or sometimes he convinces me, but the end result is always better because we challenge each other. We look at the things we're doing and say, how could this be done better? Why are you doing it this way? Why did you make that decision? And I think that is something that you cannot get from people who you employ because, for the obvious reasons, people are fearful often of, challenging the boss. And I think that's what a partner does. And as we expand, our goal will be to look at potentially bringing on additional partners, people that have skin in the game. We have a great team, by the way, I should say, and they're fabulous folks. And they do challenge us from time to time. But I think you really need somebody who has skin in the game, who's looking at, the long-term prospects of the firm to make that work as effectively as possible.
Was there, when you guys were sitting together in those initial conversations, I think you said he called, or that initial conversation, were there things you were looking for? Because you had not done this previously with a partner, correct? So it was
Correct.
A little bit of imagination. Were there critical path items that you were looking for around mindset, around beliefs, around behaviors, around industry? What was, I don't want to call it a test, but what were you looking for in those early days?
Really someone to bounce things off of, who's at the same level, who has the same goal, which is to grow the firm. Basically, that's the goal of every agency, I believe, to grow the firm, to serve clients really well, and to be known for the kind of work we do, so that clients are like, wow, that's a company I want to work with. That's an agency I want to work with. And so to have somebody to challenge you, that was what I was looking for in a partner, as I mentioned. And I think that's the key. I mean, you can do it on your own, but it's very hard to bounce things off of someone who's not, got an equity position in the agency in a way that's really realistic.
Yeah. So one of the things we talk about is this very gross categorization of agencies as lifestyle firms versus performance firms. It's a gross categorization, a lifestyle versus performance. And so in those early days, when you guys were talking, if Paul had said, I see us having 10 offices and 5 different verticals in the next 5 to 10 years. And I see us at a team of 30 people. That's kind of a performance business. And I don't know where you were and your choice of those, but even though you had someone you could bounce ideas off, someone you trusted, someone you liked, but their vision was performance and that didn't match with yours or vice versa, is that a non-starter? Or do you think you could sort of weld that together just on those good things that you had identified?
Well, I think if you have fundamentally different ideas of where you want to take the firm, then that would be that could be a challenge.
Right.
But I think so. I don't. If one person wants to grow to be like 10 offices, I think you need more than 30 people. But then and the other person wants to keep it at one office and 30 people, then you probably have a disconnect. And we don't operate that way. I mean, neither one of us, we don't throw down demands. And that's another thing I think with a partner, you don't, you're not going to be successful with someone who says, well, I've got to do this way. I think if someone comes to you and says, you know what, I'm thinking about our growth strategy. I think maybe an office in X, Y, and Z would be a great idea. What do you think? Then you have a conversation, and that's how we work. And I believe that's how partners need to work.
Can I, following up on that? So, you've mentioned a few times that sort of the goal was to grow the firm. And you also said that the plan is to stay a boutique agency. So tell me sort of what that looks like.
Yeah. And so, but what does boutique agency mean, right? It doesn't necessarily.
I can give you the industry standard. It would be under 10 million, right? I mean, that's typically how we think about boutique agencies.
Yeah. And, again, like I said, we don't follow industry standards. So, I think of a boutique agency as one that services clients in a certain way. And it does tend to be smaller firms because they're able to do that. But for example, for our part of our philosophy is that every account is partner led, right? So that limits you because there's only so many accounts you can do. So in order to expand, you have to have another partner to lead those clients. So, and that's the kind of boutique touch that we want to have on these clients, that you've got a partner leading your account there, a very senior experienced person who's going to be able to really help you drive your business forward. And that's the way we think about what boutique means.
And so if you want to grow at some point, I mean, obviously that's not a terribly scalable model, right? So at some point, you're just going to have to bring in more partners. And by partner, you mean sort of equity stake partners in the organization.
That's exactly right.
So how long did you wait for Paul to come along? Like, is this a dream that you had from the time that you were a 20-something agency practitioner? And did you really just have to wait until the right moment came along? Because, I mean, Bob, I don't think I'm going to shock our listeners when I say, you launched Xbox, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So just to give people some context of how long Bob's been in the business.
I hope we don't have to define what Xbox is. It's not quite the fax machine.
I hope not. Or I didn't do my job very well. Yeah, that was 20 years ago, Aarti. So I think that's your point. But I've been around. I know the business well. I've been around for a long time. And the truth is, what you're focusing on is, it took a long time for me to find somebody like Paul. It's finding the right partner is a challenge. And, sometimes you never do, right? So you either have to go out on your own or you have to stay within a structure, a large structure that already exists. But I always want, I'm an entrepreneurial person, right? I think you either are or you aren't. I'm not sure there's a middle ground there. But I'd like to hear about that if there is. I'm an entrepreneurial person. So I always wanted to build an agency and, have it be something that's, it's my baby, if you will. But I realized that I wanted to do that with a partner. And so it took many years to find Paul, frankly. I mean, I always, we marvel today at the fact that we're able to come together and do this and are so excited to be doing it together, honestly.
How often do you guys talk on a day in, day out basis?
Oh, we talk every day.
Scheduled, ad hoc? Just give us a sense of that real life cadence of conversation.
Yeah. So we have scheduled meetings for a purpose, right? So that happen twice a week. And then we have ad hoc conversations that pop up, like I'll say, I want to bounce this off Paul. I'm talking to a client and I'm proposing something and they've got some ideas about it, so I'll give Paul, we communicate via Zoom basically most of the time. But yeah, we probably talk daily, but we have our set meetings are twice a week.
Yeah. I remember my first entrepreneurial agency endeavor was in a partnership. I mean, it was with a kind of a managing, and then three of us had equity stakes. And one of the things the managing partner said early on is he said, if I'm not talking to you guys at least once, but certainly every other day, it just doesn't feel right. And you get to Wednesday and you haven't talked, something is sort of flickering, on the radar, and you should be tuned in on that. And so my experience was that was the case. If you made it to like Thursday and you hadn't talked to everybody, either on vacation, which usually is not the case. So I think that's really good guidance in order to have that sort of constant touch point, both fixed and ad hoc are both really, really critical.
Yeah, I totally agree, Bill. I think, it's just, it's not when it's somebody that you respect and admire, it's not a forced thing. It's like, oh, I want to talk to him about this, or, oh, this happened. I want to mention it to Paul, so you're kind of excited to have those conversations. It's not like, oh gosh, I got to talk.
And those are with team and without team. It's just the two of you as well as with team. I mean, that's a mix.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, when it's right, exactly. When it has to do with the clients, it's, the teams are often involved. If it's something to do with the business, it's usually us and also, our finance person. So, but we talk all the time, just the two of us, sometimes it's just like, hey, I saw this really cool story, or, hey, did you see this? Or I did this really cool thing with Chat GPT I wanted to tell you about.
Yeah.
So Bob, I have a question. You mentioned what's the middle ground, right? You're either entrepreneurial or not. I mean, would the middle ground be phantom equity? And is that something that you're thinking about as you guys bring on additional partners?
Boy, that's a CFO question. Because I'm being.
Right. I mean, it gives someone sort of a stake in the company, but it doesn't sort of entitle them, right? So they're not an actual owner in the same way that you and Paul would be.
Right. Exactly.
And I see that employed at a lot of agencies, as you know, like there's agencies where people have a partner title, right? Where they're not actually they don't actually have ownership in the agency. So I just wonder, given your model, if that's something you've considered as you guys grow out.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely something you have to. I mean, I wouldn't want to rule something like that out. So we would consider it in the future.
And the other thing that you said that I wanted to follow up on is you said you wanted to be known for the work that you do. So can you tell us a little bit about how an agency your size is known in the marketplace? Like, how do you find most of your clients? So how do you define sort of being known?
Yeah, that's what we spend part of our time doing, which is our own thought leadership, right? We write a lot of articles where we create videos that we use through a number of different channels. Some of them are, contributors to various publications. Some are through LinkedIn, which is basically one of our primary marketing channels, I would say, which is probably similar for many companies, certainly our size. And it's also, we were founded during COVID, so we haven't done much of this yet. But speaking opportunities, we're pitched on, those on a reasonably frequent basis. So, going to speak at various conferences is another way. And it's also just networking. And most of our clients, by the way, come through our networks. People that we've known in the past, we worked with in the past. Business is about trust, right? And so you have that trust with people that you've known in the past or communicated with in the past or know you through, another person, for example. So that's how a lot of our clientele comes. But of course, as you grow, you have to do more, marketing.
So, I mean, it's interesting when you think about LinkedIn. And when I was doing this, Bob, one of the things I struggled with, and I'd love your reaction to, is to be known. Is it the agency to be known, or is it the individual to be known? And then recently I've heard this really interesting statistic that take Richard Branson, Elon Musk, and Ronaldo, their social followings are greater than the sum of all of their brands. So if you take everybody in the Premiership and their social followings of the teams, pale in comparison to Ronaldo. Everything Branson owns pales in comparison to Branson, and same for Musk. So how do you think about being known as Bob and Paul, or Paul, versus Bold being known in your content marketing and thought leadership? How do you struggle with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, the simple truth is that people buy from people, right? Mm-hmm. They, in this type of business. In other businesses, you buy a pair of Nikes, right? You don't care about the founder anymore or whatnot. Although you could argue that if you buy a Tesla, you're really buying Elon Musk. But, so at this stage of our growth, they're buying us. But building the Bold brand is also important as we grow. So that it becomes more than the sum of two people, and ultimately it will be. But we're not super concerned about that. I mean, Paul and I both develop thought leadership content. It goes out under our Bold page on LinkedIn and under our own individual LinkedIn pages. So, that's a simple solution. I don't know if that answered the question, but
it is. So, but it seems like you've thought about it, but your answer to it is kind of 50-50 it, or 33-33 it, kind of is the way you think about it. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
We're not at the stage yet. We want to be, and we will be in the future, where people are saying, I want Bold. They're still sort of associating Paul and I with the brand.
Well, but you made the decision not to have your names in the agency name.
That is a very astute observation. Yes, indeed, we did. We did not want to be like, like the name type.
Like Fleischman Hillard.
Right. Although I would argue at this point, Fleischman, Hillard, Edelman, are they really people anymore? It's a brand.
Agreed. I was using a pretty safe example. Although poor Hill and Knowlton, they don't exist anymore.
We'll have a moment of silence for Hill and Knowlton.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
But to that end, to both of you, because I was in it for a little while, but not for as long as you guys have been in the big agency stuff. Does anybody say, get me fill in the blank, get me Edelman, like they would say, I need McKinsey? I mean, if you're a big CEO, and these are some of our clients, if you're a big CEO and you've got a big industrial challenge, get me McKinsey. And there's no RFP, there's no challenge. Do people say that anymore in the big industry space?
I think so.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I absolutely think so. And to be fair, I think people will still say, I want Richard, right? I mean, Richard has CEOs of Fortune 50 companies in his cell phone, right? And they expect that he'll answer the phone. Again, like I don't want to speak for him, but I think that's a fair. I think it's safe to assume that. I wanted to ask a question. You've talked about your team, Bob, right? Can you describe, what the makeup of this team is? Is it freelancers? Is it full-time staff? And the reason I ask is one of the competitive advantages of being a boutique agency is often your employer brand, right? I mean, creating a culture that folks can buy into, values, and depending on what your mix is, whether you're primarily freelancers or whether you're full-time staff, I'd love to hear about how you kind of build a culture. But I guess maybe let's start with sort of what your team looks like. Is it full-time? Is it freelancers? A mix of both?
Yeah, it's well, first of all, we're a virtual agency, right? We started during COVID, and we all got used to the virtual model, and we see no reason to change. When we do big client meetings, we often do them, we lease spaces to do those in, and they're readily available. And the reason it's powerful for us is because it allows us to work with very experienced people. So that may live in different locations and wouldn't necessarily come to a specific location. So that's kind of one of the benefits, is that our team is dispersed, and it is a combination of full-time employees, contractors, and some freelancers, as well as some other smaller firms that we might leverage for a certain specific skill set. So that's kind of how we balance out our teams. But ultimately, and of course, the client always knows who's on their team, and ultimately, either Paul or I are responsible for that business. So we feel very confident about that. But yeah, it's a mix, and because of our virtual nature, we've been able to tap into some really amazing talent that otherwise people in New York that we work with that they aren't going to move to the West Coast. And we don't want to have to open an office there for, one or two people. That's a challenge for many reasons. So the virtual nature of our firm allows us to have this more flexible model, which enables us to provide a wide range of services to our clients.
When you think about your team, did you find them or did they find you? And if you could just sort of look at the staff meeting, who found who in that sort of the group you have now?
Yeah, it's actually, that's a good question, Bill, because to our surprise, people came to us and said, "Hey, I like what you're doing. Can I be involved?" And we were like, "Wow!" So most of the people, these are people. Again, I've been on the agency side a long time. Paul's been on the client side. We have a pretty good network, so they're mostly people that we know. and we've invited to be part of this entity. And so, but we've had some people surprisingly come and say, hey, and we work with a lot of, because a lot of what we do is we do data-driven work and creative work, and those are very different skill sets. So the creative folks tend to be writers with all kinds of different experiences and backgrounds. And the data people tend to be, sort of data science-y, and they have, that type of a background. And so we're able to bring this kind of collection of folks together to create what we're doing. But
I was going to ask about culture, because it sounds like, while you're able to bring in some really senior talent based on your model, like what's the collective values, right? That when people say, we want to come to you, you're doing something interesting. What is that interesting thing? Like, what is it that people are coming to you for? And then how do you bring everyone together for sort of a shared purpose? Especially, given that you do have this really eclectic mix of freelancers and full-time staffers that are distributed around the country. People are doing really different jobs. It sounds like there's creative folks, there's data folks. So tell me a little bit about how you bring all this together in a cohesive culture.
Yeah, I think culture is built around a set of shared values, right? And so the values are what we set forth when we established the firm, which was that we are very client focused and very service oriented. So we look people that are have a service mindset, right? And that creates, there's a culture around those kinds of people. They think in a certain way. There's people that are looking to do not just get the work done, but really do it at a higher level, do it have people challenge them to do their best work. That's part of our culture. It's like being able to challenge each other, as Paul and I do. They see us doing that, and that makes it okay for them to do it. And that's a key part of the culture. And it's also about being selective about our clients. Like, we're not just here to do any work. We want to work with clients that are really trying to move the needle, that are doing something different, that are open to new ideas, new ways of thinking, that aren't just set in what the conventional wisdom is. And I think that's a type of person too. So when you think about those three things, that it's a collection of people that all have that similar mindset. Culture isn't about foosball, and beer on at 4:00 on Thursdays. It's really about how you think and how you approach the work that you do. And sometimes we do have shared things that we do outside of work, but the important thing is the shared commitment around the work itself.
So do you get people in a venue, whether it's Zoom is a venue, what's the collective mass look like, and how often do you do that, and why do you do it?
Yeah, we've been talking about this because this is a very timely question, because the only time our whole team has ever been together has been on Zoom. We've done regionally, because people are dispersed, we've done get-togethers in person in different parts of the country, but not with the entire team.
Yeah.
And we've been thinking about, okay, should we get everybody together under one roof? And that's been a discussion point. We haven't done that yet. Yeah. And is it necessary? I mean, it's really interesting that there are people on our team at least, some people that I've never met in person. I've only met over Zoom. And so most of the people I've known before, so we've known each other in person. But it's interesting how it's so comfortable. It's become so flexible and I should say Teams too. I mean, our clients use Teams, so we also use Teams and Zoom.
Is that a shout out for Microsoft? Is that a Microsoft shout out?
Yes, exactly.
Google
Former client.
Google Meets.
Yeah. But
so do you think you'll do it this year? Will you have everybody together this year? What's your over under on that?
We're talking about towards the end of the year.
Okay.
That's our thinking, but we haven't made any firm plan yet. And then the question is, where do we do it? Right?
Yeah.
Is it going to be East Coast? Is it West Coast? We try to do it in the middle?
Rotate, man, rotate. You gotta, just cover off your bases. LA this year, New York next. Where is Paul based?
Paul is in Northern California. He's
okay.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay.
How often do the two of you see each other in person?
At least monthly.
Okay.
By design or just through clients?
It's by design, but I mean, the client thing happens all the time, so that's convenient. But we have we do a monthly strategy meeting that we usually do in person.
Right, and you guys have an agenda. We use Traction, the EOS model. Do you have a way of communicating with each other in those strategy meetings, or just sort of shooting it around on good ideas?
No, every meeting has an agenda.
I love it.
And it's like, I think it's really critical to have an agenda to decide what are we trying to accomplish and what do we need to cover. So even in those strategies, I mean, there are parts of it that are brainstorms, and we may bring in some of our team members to do that with. So it's, we're fairly flexible about that, but always an agenda. So we leave that meeting having accomplished something.
Yeah, I've found that's critically valuable, because the informality of great conversation is a little bit like a sugar high. But if you want to get to the protein, you kind of have to work through the things that matter. And I've also, a partnership is a relationship, and relationships, as we all know, in various forms and constructs, are challenging. And so having rules of engagement are really valuable. And I think you guys have been very fortunate in the way you've come together, and the way you talk about it is good. But I do want to press in. Can you think of a time where you and Paul have had conflict and how you've worked it out? And you touched on it a little bit with Aarti's question previously, but is there an example of conflict, disagreement, or misalignment, and how did you work through it?
We disagree all the time. It's like, that's part of our shtick. So, there's little things and there's big things, right? And it really is a matter of when you disagree, you have to. Well, first of all, I respect his point of view, even when I disagree with him. I think that's really important, and it's never personal, right? That is the key. It can't be personal. When you start taking it into a personal realm, then you've lost.
Yeah.
But we disagree. We respect each other's point of view, and we'll try to convince each other of, like, okay, here's another data point about why my perspective is the correct one. So we often go back and forth on that, and then a lot of times I'll be convinced, Paul. Okay, Paul, you know what? You're right. I was wrong about that. And I think admitting that you're wrong is another thing that is, and it's very hard for experienced people to do that, and for people who have had the chutzpah to start their own agency, right? I mean, it's those people have a hard time saying I'm wrong. At least I've noticed in my experience. So you have to be able to say, you know what, I'm wrong. You're right. You convinced me. So I think that's part of our process, and we share that with our teams. And I think they've come around to the same idea. It's like, oh, wow, right? I'm wrong about this. I might even have held that position for a long time, but you know what? Things have changed. That's no longer valid. And I think that's important to be able to acknowledge those kinds of things. So that's, usually we resolve things like that. Sometimes we decide we're going to both try a different, we're each going to try our own approach. And then we come back and say, okay, how did yours go? And then we see, what happened. And then we kind of rib each other a little bit. But that's generally how we resolve things. I don't know. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's great. And I'll just say one more just related to that. And about decision-making. It's similar to the conflict. How have you guys figured out when to cut bait and when to double down? When have you, so like you had one of these moments and you agreed that this is the thing. When do you say that's really not the thing? Or it's such the thing, it's just not there yet, so we need to double down. So what's your thinking around cut bait versus double down?
Yeah, I mean, that's
how do you do it?
How do you do it? What happens when people disagree, right? It's like, I think that it's different in every situation. It depends on what it is. I mean, we're fundamentally aligned, so we don't have disagreements about that, which is really important. So everything that we do, when we do disagree with something, it's not something that's fundamental to what we're trying to accomplish. So one of us, sometimes we do a cooling off period. We're like, okay, let's table that for now, and let's talk about it, next week, if it's not a timely thing. And that often works. And then, because, then we'll both think about it and we'll come back and go like, okay, you know what? I think I agree with your perspective. Or how about if we do it like this? Would that make more sense and address some of the things that you raised? I think that, a back and forth is really what's necessary. But sometimes you need a cooling off period.
I think that there's so many gems in what you just said, Bob, that I just want to recap it for our listeners. Respect.
Amen.
Try not to take things personally. Be able to admit when you're wrong. Having a sense of humor. And that cooling off period. I think those 5 nuggets, I think whether you're in a business partnership or just navigating relationships in general, I think, whether it's with your teams, colleagues, clients, I mean, I think those are just really important nuggets. And on that vein, I wanted to ask you a little bit about leadership during these, as we all like to call them, unprecedented times. I mean, you said you launched during the pandemic, right? During lockdown. So that in and of itself was sort of a unique kind of climate to launch in. Since then, what's happened, right? I mean, the tech sector has completely changed from 2020 to where we are today. The macroeconomic environment is very different. We have generative AI, which is completely disrupting our business. So tell us a little bit about, founding and leading an agency through such kind of volatile times.
That's a really good question, and I think what we came to was that a very high degree of flexibility in what you want to do and how you accomplish it is required in this current time, right? I mean, it's not, and this has been building for a while. I think that the ability to be very flexible of mind is important now to be successful in any business, because things change very rapidly and you have to be able to adapt. And if you're stuck in a model and you can't change from best practices, as they say, then you're going to be in trouble. You have to adjust your practices all the time. I think the pandemic taught us that. It was, that's how we started. We kind of started in that crucible, and so Paul and I are both, we're lifelong learners, right? That's another thing I think that's critical for someone who wants to play this role, is you got to be a lifelong learner. You have to love learning. I mean, I spend my spare time reading about all kinds of different subjects, because I'm super interested in everything. And I think that's what allows me to bring certain value to what I do for clients. But you also have to have a flexibility of mind. Oh, this is new information. We have to adapt to this. We have to change to this. And I think that's what this time has taught us. But I think it's been coming for a while. And especially in the tech area, they see that things are changing. Business models that worked a few years ago are completely, irrelevant today.
Do you regret that or miss that? Or are you excited about all of that change?
Oh my gosh. As you know, from my
hobby
I'm setting you up.
Stand by.
I love change. I love thinking about it. I even though some people don't like this term, but I think of myself as a futurist. Like, what's going to happen? Where are things going to go? I'm always thinking about, what does this mean? What's the big picture? Let's see, what was it? Nesbitt that wrote that book many, many years ago called Megatrends.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think that, it's been updated a little bit, and there's been others, Super Forecasters.
They did
another
Asia,
great book.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, that the idea that you look at these trends and you try to figure out where they're going. And it's really important in our business, right? Because clients need not to be where they are today. They need to understand where they're going. And that's what we help them do. So they can adapt to what that coming future is, short term, medium term, and long term.
Yeah. So one of my, a very wise podcast co-host said that people are viewing. That's you, Aarti. Are viewing AI with fear and fascination. And I'd love to hear you react to that, Bob. How are you viewing AI and generative AI and using it as a tool in our agencies? And then I want to ask you a follow-up to that, but just talk a little bit about that axis of fear and fascination.
Yeah, I mean, I don't view it as with fear, I have to say. I mean, there's the generative AI, general AI, not generative AI, but general AI is not here yet. And we're still a few years away from it. Could that threaten, society as we know it? It might, but you know what? It's like worrying about that is a useless exercise. Mm-hmm. But generative AI, is changing our business, but in amazing ways. It allows us to do more. It gives us other avenues and ways of thinking about things. But so far, it doesn't replace human creativity, right? At the end of the day, what we do is all about creativity. It's about novel ideas. And a novel idea is the bringing together of two things that don't normally go together, right? And that's what makes it novel. And AI really can't do that yet. It will in the future. I mean, we'll see that in our lifetimes for sure. And maybe sooner. Paul and I actually argue about this all the time. I say 10 years, he says less.
For what? For what happens in 10 years?
That AI, that generative AI will actually be able to be creative, will replace human creativity or have the ability to replace it. I think we're a ways off from that right now.
So I want to take a second because I know you kind of focused on the fascination piece, but I do want to validate this fear that people do have. I was at a dinner, a couple of months ago there was a CMO there, and he admitted that he started out this year with a much bigger team. And now it's him and generative AI. And this particular dinner was being hosted by an agency, and he looked at the agency, the leadership in that room, and he said, "And I'm pretty sure that I won't need you in about a year's time." So I think there is something to be said for this apprehension and this anxiety that the industry is feeling. I know Google just came out and said that their sort of ongoing layoffs have not been related to AI. And that AI is not necessarily replacing jobs, to your point, Bob. Yeah. But I mean, as you think about, you're in the field of content. We're all, we're in an hourly billing model. AI's automated a lot of tasks. It's made it faster. So, I mean, realistically, like, where do you see things? Like, how do you see your business changing on the back of generative AI?
Yeah, I think what's important is to think about, why do clients work with agencies, right? And one of the main reasons, there's a couple reasons, right? Extensibility is one, right? If I have a big launch coming up and I need a lot of people, I'm not going to hire them all. I can just get an agency to help me with that, So you have that extensible model. It also might be customized skills that you don't need all the time, but I need them at this point in time. But really, one of the reasons you hire an agency is because they're bringing that external perspective. Right? When you're inside of the organization, and I've been in organizations twice, and you have one perspective. The agency brings another perspective that can help you to do things better, that you can't get on your own by yourself, and you can't get it from AI just yet. You need that external perspective to help you understand and look at the situation from that viewpoint. And also, agencies have to adapt to what clients need in this world of AI, right? You think of an illustrator. You can replace an illustrator by using one of the generative AI models. Well, you can to a certain extent, but one of the things that an illustrator does besides just create the illustration is to conceptualize what the client is asking for. To what is the visual that's needed to bring that idea to life. The illustrator is also processing that. The client might be able to do that themselves by iterating many times through this, but oftentimes they're not sure exactly what they need. And that's where the creativity of a person who works with images, can be valuable. Again, all these things can change over time, and different people may have different perspectives. But I still think there's a lot of value in the way that creative people think. It's not just about the execution, which is what generative AI can give you.
Yeah. So we foreshadowed a little bit. You are the best-selling author of a science fiction series, Gene Pool. For those of you, it's on Amazon. For those of you that want to check out Gene Pool. But in Gene Pool, your protagonist, and help me out, make sure I get the pronunciation right, your protagonist is Amédée Bertrand. Is that right?
That's right.
And it's set in 2059.
Right.
What would Amédée say looking at 2024, if she could look back 25 or in reverse 25 years, is what you predicted that's going to happen in 2059? Is it going to happen? Is it real? And this is really just an opportunity for you to be futurist for us in 2059.
Well, as you know, Bill, if you've read the book, my perspective on that future is all about the age of genetic engineering, right? So we're in the information technology age, really still. It's all about silicon. But we're very close to being able to modify DNA and to use it almost like a programming language. And that's what the book is really about. How do you use biological, because we're trying to create a brain that's as good as the human brain. Well, evolution already created it, so why not just leverage it? And that's what it's all about. If we can leverage what has already evolved and evolve it further, then we can do some amazing things. And that's really what the book is about. How do human beings survive in a world where we take charge of our own evolution? And I think Amédée would look back and see things like CRISPR and the stuff that's happening with the genetic work that's going on right now and say, yeah, I totally see the path. So I think we are on that path. It's not something that many people talk about because we're very focused on silicon-based intelligence right now rather than biologically based.
Yeah, that's fascinating. We want to wrap up. So Bob, thank you for your time. It's been incredibly generous. And I think you've shared, that thing that Aarti highlighted of sort of your sort of rules of engagement and relationship seem pretty universal. We may have to turn that into a poster. It's pretty good stuff. So that was pretty,
or at least a thought leadership piece.
Absolutely. It was pretty awesome.
Thank you, Bob. It's always great. It's always great to talk to you. And yeah, we need to have another conversation about more about the futuristic kind of perspective on where we're going as a species. But thank you, Bob.
And as you take us out,
listen, thank you guys. These are really, really smart questions. I hope this is valuable to the audience. I think it will be. And it's an exciting time. I wouldn't. I think embrace the change and be excited about it and think about what you can do and how you can do it differently. That's what I would say in closing. So, but thank you guys for doing this amazing work, and I look forward to seeing it.
Awesome. And thank you for the introduction. It's been great.
Wow. Well, I think Bob really delivered on what you said at the beginning, Bill, was that finding the right partner is so critical. And that's one of the key reasons why he waited as long as he did. He didn't want to do this on his own.
Yeah. And I think it's lucky. I think a lot of agency owners find it. I think they most often find it within their agency partners, their client partners. Someone within their client ecosystem has an entrepreneurial itch. Maybe they find someone else in the agency world that wants to bust out with them. But I think the big lesson is kind of always be looking, always be thinking, and ask if it's a good fit, and get out the cocktail napkin and see what it would actually look like. I think it's about complementarianism, people to be complementary skill sets of yin and yang, a seller and an operator, a front office and a back office. And I think that's what Bob did. And I think that's what it sort of took him a while. He had the bug, but I think it took him a while to kind of find the yin to his yang.
I think you nailed it when you said the seller and the operator, and the most successful partnerships I've seen have had those two types. And there's usually a front person, right? Someone who's sort of the face of the agency. And there's usually someone who's a little bit more comfortable being in the background. Sometimes they also have a third person I've seen that works
Mhm.
really well. And that person is really your client person. That person is your, chief client officer at the end of the day. And they can make sure all those accounts are happy and maybe even make sure the talent's happy. Um, what's interesting is, and as we do more of these conversations, I think we'll have some CEOs or some founders on here that very adamantly did not want a partner. So like yourself, Phil.
Yeah.
And and even when I started my journey, I remember saying, "Oh gosh, well maybe it'd be better to do this with somebody." And I had many folks tell me, "No, you don't want you if you need help, hire somebody, but
Yeah.
don't go into partnership lightly." And on that note, Bob had a couple of ideas or some rules, I guess, in terms of a successful partnership. And those were, just to recap those:
Mhm.
respect each other, don't take things personally, admit when you're wrong, have a good sense of humor, and have a cooling off period after sort of intense conversations. And I found all of those to be, really they could be applicable to pretty much any relationship,
Yeah, I was going
right?
to say that's good for a podcast partner as well as your husband or
Yes,
wife. So yeah, so I think
exactly,
all those are
exactly.
great rules to live by.
The one that I wish I had kind of pushed on him a little bit more on was don't take things personally, because I think that's
Yeah.
about as effective as telling an anxious person to relax if something does land with you personally, right? So I was thinking about that, and I actually did some research on that, and the Harvard Business Review actually did an article recently on how not to take things personally at work, and I liked they had a couple of suggestions, but two that stood out to me. One was interrupt internalization. So once you hear yourself taking something personally and saying, "Oh wow, well they only, they think that I'm not good at X," or whatever it might be, like interrupt that thought. And then the other one was, I thought that was really good, was build immunity to your fears. And the way you do that is you just sort of, like the way you do any sort of immunity, you practice by sort of, maybe smaller moments, right? Where maybe you don't feel, things aren't feeling as personal, but in that moment, interrupt the internalization, even if it feels fairly minor. Just start building that muscle.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the great article, by the way, and I think we'll include that in the show notes so people can see that. But I also think it's this context for me to not take things personally. Is you're in a partnership with someone that you trust, someone that you respect, and giving people the benefit of the doubt helps with that, not taking it personally, is that they are coming from, and we talk about this with some of our coaching clients about, when they're trying to transition their firm to their team and the team isn't really aligned, is they're doing the best they can with what they have. And if you sort of give grace in that space, doesn't mean you need to abandon. If you think it should be red and the other person thinks it should be green, doesn't mean you need to abandon the idea, but it means that you can say, okay, I wonder why they think it's green. And maybe we should talk about that. So I think that's just a kind of a clarity and an honesty of heart that I think is repeating kind of what Harvard talks about in that context. They're not out to get you, and so let's start there, and then let's figure out what the solution might be.
I think that's a really great point. Is you need to make sure that your partner is somebody who you can assume best intentions with,
Yeah.
and that you sort of feel that right authentically. I will say I have known agency partners in our business where if I had drinks with one, they will start bad mouthing the other. And once I hear the third, don't tell so and so this, but like I know that partnership's
bad.
in deep trouble. And I watched those partnerships fall apart right before my very eyes, right?
Yeah.
And it's like it's a terrible divorce when those things happen. And our industry has a few famous examples of that.
Yeah. The other thing Bob talked about that we maybe didn't go as deep as we probably could have, but really fascinating stuff, is that futurist and being the futurist. And he wrote a fiction novel, sort of this dystopian fantasy. And it's talking about the world, 50 years from now. And so it was really, really fascinating the way he talked about that. And I am sure that as he pitches clients, you can just see him light up on that topic, and in the ability that when he can find the right fit client that lets him talk about that, and then maybe his partner comes in and backfills with the operational and the tactical elements, that's probably a really that's a client that's going to get tremendous value in his sort of futuristic thinking.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, his fascination with technology and his willingness to embrace it versus sort of having a fear, sort of a fear first approach to it. And to be fair, a lot of like we were talking about AI, right? I was actually reading a media sentiment analysis of AI, and it's been so negative, right, over the last year. And a lot of it has been about its impact on the workforce, right? I mean, even today, there was a story about IBM layoffs in the marketing department, and the thread was made between that and AI and the layoffs that are happening in marketing departments everywhere. But what I like about Bob is he does seek out, the opportunities here without being completely naive to the impact that this could have on the labor force. Yeah.
Sometimes I found futurists just to be kind of in their la la land, and they create their own reality future state. But no, Bob's, I think, grounded in what needs to be done, and also move product, which is what I think kind of is sort of as a good marketer mindset that he has. Yeah, great conversation, and one of many that we're going to continue on in the podcast.
Yeah, that was a great conversation, and hopefully there'll be more like that. Well, thanks everyone for listening, and we will see you next time on the Heart and Science podcast with another founder with another story.